We're going to tackle a question that's puzzled people for a long time.
Yeah.
What motivates us? Why do we do the things we do?
It's the question about human nature, right?
Yeah.
What makes us tick?
That is exactly why we are here today, diving into some really cutting-edge research with Dr. Rob Henderson. His work is interesting, especially because it builds on big shifts in psychology.
He's really on the pulse of the latest findings, and one of the things that I find so fascinating about his work is how he's incorporating these lessons from the replication crisis in psychology.
For those who haven't heard, can you quickly break down what that is?
Yeah, so it was this period where researchers were realizing that some classic psychology studies, they just didn't hold up when they tried to repeat them.
Interesting.
It was a very much needed wake-up call, I think, for the field about rigorous research methods and ensuring that the findings are reliable.
Absolutely. Because of that work, we can be even more confident in the insights that Dr. Henderson is presenting. Money matters. It's important, but not the be-all and end-all of motivation. He says we need to understand the power of status. Let's define status. It's not just about being rich, right?
No, not at all. It's about social value. Think of it like this. Your wealth, that's what you have.
Okay.
But your status, that's what you are in the eyes of others.
It's about how you're perceived by your social group or peers.
Exactly.
Almost outside of yourself. It has a real impact on your life and how you interact with the world.
Neuroscientists like Michael Gazzaniga have found our brains are wired to think about status even when we don't realize it. It's constantly running in the background of our minds.
Our brains are always sizing other people up.
Yeah.
And figuring out where we stand.
Subconsciously.
Fascinating. From an evolutionary perspective, why is status so important?
That's a great question. For our ancestors, status wasn't about ego or vanity. It was tied to survival. Higher status meant better access to resources, greater protection, increased attractiveness to potential mates.
Interesting.
It increases your chances of survival, but even more importantly, your chances of passing on your genes.
So in the context of evolution, it makes total sense that we are hardwired to care about status.
Absolutely.
But it's not all about brute force, though,
Yeah.
right? There's nuance here.
Right.
Because Dr. Henderson talks about two different types of status, dominance and vestige.
Yes. Understanding the difference between these two is so crucial, especially in today's world.
Absolutely.
So dominance. That's the more primal form. It's all about power through force or threat of force. Alpha animals, leaders who maintain their position through aggression and intimidation.
A strategy that's often effective in the short term,
Sure.
but not so much the long game.
It rarely leads to long-term stability.
Yeah.
And Dr. Henderson uses this very chilling example of Comrade Dutch, who was this brutal leader during the Cambodian genocide.
Oh, wow.
He maintained his position through fear and coercion, but it ultimately created a regime that was just marked by instability and brutality and eventually collapsed.
The stark reminder that dominance can have a real dark downside.
Definitely.
On the flip side, you have prestige.
Prestige is earned through knowledge, skill, positive contributions to the group.
Okay.
Think of someone like Stephen Hawking, right? He had immense prestige.
Yeah,
He wasn't dominant in using force or coercion.
Right.
He was respected and admired for his intellect and contributions to science.
That respect was freely given, not taken by force.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of prestige, is that it tends to create this much more stable and harmonious.
Dominance is demanding respect, and prestige is earning it.
100%.
Your actions and contributions. I have to bring up something Dr. Henderson said that blew my mind. Chimpanzees are 150 to 550 times more likely to attack their own kind
Wow.
than humans in hunter-gatherer societies are.
That's a huge difference.
It's a massive difference. It makes you wonder, despite our very obvious capacity for violence, why are we relatively tame within our groups?
It's a question that scientists have been grappling with for years, and it might have something to do with that human preference for prestige over dominance we were just talking about.
Oh,
And it also brings up this other fascinating concept, the self-domestication hypothesis.
what is the self-domestication hypothesis?
It's this idea put forward by Richard Wrangham, and he suggests that over many generations, early humans essentially weeded out the most aggressive individuals from their groups. Think about it. For most of human history, we lived in these small nomadic bands.
Right.
Constant infighting would have been incredibly dangerous for the survival of the entire group.
If you're always fighting amongst yourselves, you're not going to make it very far.
Exactly. So over time, there was selection pressure against overly aggressive traits. That's not to say that they disappeared entirely, obviously, because we still have the capacity for violence. We became this more cooperative, less impulsively violent species over time.
If we're supposedly so much less violent than chimps, how do you explain war? Genocide. Like, humans are capable of truly horrific things.
Absolutely. That's actually the paradox that Wrangham highlights, this self-domestication that we're talking about. While it made us more peaceful within our tribes, it might have paradoxically increased our capacity for planned strategic violence towards other groups.
We traded everyday aggression for the ability to be more strategically, terrifyingly violent.
Yeah.
When we perceive a threat, even if that threat is other humans.
It's a very sobering thought, and it really underscores how complex our relationship to violence really is.
It makes you think about how our evolved nature is interacting with the complex societies we build.
Absolutely.
We've gone from cavemen hunting mammoths to sitting here making a podcast.
Right.
So how does all this ancient status stuff show up in today's world?
Oh, it's everywhere. Think about it. The skills that brought status in a hunter-gatherer society, hunting, tool-making, knowing where to find food, that was all about providing for the group.
Right.
They were the essential workers of their time.
Bringing crucial resources and skills to help the group survive.
Exactly.
I bet those who did it best had high status.
You got it. And those same underlying drivers, contributing value, being seen as competent and trustworthy, those are still major factors in what makes someone high status today.
So instead of spearing a mammoth, it's building a successful business or creating art that really resonates with people.
Yeah.
Becoming a doctor.
Or even social media influencers, love it or hate it, it takes skills to build a huge engaged audience online. They've mastered creating content, marketing, building a digital community.
They're the hunters of the digital savannah.
I like that analogy. Just like those ancient hunters, the more successful they are, the more status they accrue. We see the followers, engagement, brand deals, and our brains still wired for that ancient status game take notice.
It's mind-blowing how deeply rooted this stuff is. It explains why when that drive for status is thwarted, it can be so painful.
Absolutely.
Dr. Henderson talks about this too. The feeling of being excluded, low ranking in the group.
One of the most fascinating things about this research is it shows how deeply ingrained that feeling of exclusion is.
Yeah.
He talks about this experiment called the cyberball game.
Oh, yeah, where they trick you into thinking you're playing this online ball tossing game with other people, but then they stop throwing the ball to you.
Exactly. And even though it's just this like silly computer game and the people excluding you are strangers, it still triggers this measurable drop in self-esteem and feelings of belonging in participants.
Like being picked last in gym class, but amplified.
Exactly. And the reason that even something that seems so insignificant can affect us so strongly is that our brains are still, in a sense, playing catch-up with the modern world. Back in the day, being ostracized from your group was a death sentence.
Oh, yeah.
You literally couldn't survive without them.
No tribe, no safety, no food, no help if you get injured.
You were done. So even though our lives are obviously vastly different now, our brains still carry that ancient programming.
Excluded, even in a way that logically shouldn't matter as much, can still trigger those deep-seated fears of social isolation.
Yeah.
And with very real consequences.
Which I think is so important for people to understand.
Absolutely.
Once you realize that those feelings might be coming from this very primal part of your brain that's not necessarily equipped to deal with the complexities of modern life, it's easier to not take it personally when that coworker doesn't invite you to lunch or whatever.
It's about recognizing those feelings are real, but they might not always be an accurate reflection of the actual situation.
It's not about you.
Exactly.
Dr. Henderson doesn't stop there.
Okay.
He goes on to explore two fundamental drives that influence our behavior, especially in social situations.
Okay.
He calls them communion and agency. The desire to connect and belong versus the drive to achieve and stand out. We all feel that push and pull, that tension between wanting to fit in, but also wanting to forge our own path. Fundamental human dilemma.
We want to be respected, but we also want to be loved. We want to belong.
We're social creatures.
How do we find that balance?
That's where things get interesting. I think that's why Dr. Henderson argues that understanding these two drives, communion and agency, can be so helpful. Have you ever felt that inner conflict?
Yeah.
Where you're torn between wanting to go along with the group and wanting to pursue your own path?
Totally.
Even if it means standing out a little bit?
It's like that classic high school dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Like following the crowd versus daring to be different.
Yes, exactly. But it's not just high school, is it? It shows up in all areas of life.
For sure.
And what I think is so fascinating is that both of these impulses are coming from this really deep place.
Okay.
Our drive for communion, connection, belonging, that's essential for cooperation, building strong communities.
Yep.
But that drive for agency, achievement, autonomy pushes us to innovate, create, make our own mark on the world.
You need both to not just survive, but really thrive.
Yes.
Both as an individual and as a society.
I think this idea of recognizing those two drives and how they show up in our lives is so helpful.
Well,
Let's say you're in a situation and you're feeling that pull between wanting to fit in and wanting to do your own thing.
speak up.
By understanding that tension, you can start to make more conscious choices about how you move through the world.
It's not just about repressing one drive or the other.
No, it's about recognizing that they both serve a purpose.
Right.
Finding that sweet spot where they coexist and flourish.
That balance might look different for everyone.
What feels right for you might not feel right for someone else, and that's okay.
It's about knowing yourself.
Yes.
Recognizing which drive might be stronger for you.
Yeah.
Being mindful of how that influences your choices and how you interact with people.
100%. Being aware of those drives in others can help you understand their motivations,
Right.
behaviors, even their values better.
That's interesting.
It's like having this whole new lens through which to view all of your interactions.
It's like a cheat sheet for understanding human behavior.
Right.
If you could give our listeners one piece of advice based on all this, what would it be?
There's so much to unpack here. If I had to choose, I would say pay attention to those moments when you feel that pang of social comparison, that urge to chase after status, whether it's online or in the real world.
I'm not good.
Just ask yourself, what need am I actually trying to meet here?
Oh, wow.
Is it connection? Is it validation? Is it maybe this deeper desire to contribute something meaningful?
Once you know what's driving that urge, you can make a more conscious choice about how to respond,
Exactly.
acting on autopilot.
You're not just reacting emotionally, you're taking control of the game more.
I love that.
Okay.
To wrap up this deep dive into the complicated world of human motivation,
It's a lot.
it's a lot, but we can all agree on this.
Okay.
Understanding these very ancient drives for status, for connection, for agency, it's not about manipulating other people or winning some kind of social game.
Right.
It's about self-awareness,
Yeah.
empathy, navigating with more wisdom and understanding of ourselves and others.
Beautifully said.
So listeners, that is all the time we have for today's deep dive into the fascinating world of human behavior.
Fun.
It was fascinating. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and remember, the most fascinating discoveries are often the ones we make about ourselves.
100%.
In today's world with social media and that line between real-world achievement and online validation can get so blurry.
It really can. Makes you wonder, right? Is getting 1 million likes on Instagram?
Yeah. Is that really bringing down the woolly rhino for your tribe?
Does our ancient hardware even know the difference? It's such a good question, and I think it gets at the heart of the potential pitfalls of this always-on hyper-connected world that we live in.
For sure.
Because if we're not careful, we can end up chasing after this kind of status that ultimately doesn't really translate into real-world value, genuine connection, or lasting fulfillment.
It's like we're constantly striving for something, more likes, more followers, more validation, but it never quite satisfies that deeper need, real connection and contribution.
Endless treadmill never really gets you anywhere.
And that's where I think that self-awareness piece is so crucial. We have to be mindful of what we're chasing and why are we doing it?
Are these goals actually meaningful to us?
Exactly.
Building relationships based on genuine connection and shared values, not just superficial metrics.
Because at the end of the day, maybe the real reward isn't even, but that feeling of, man, I'm really proud of the life that I'm building
Yeah.
and the contributions I'm making. Another deep dive into a really complex and fascinating topic.
Always complex.
Today, we explore the evolutionary roots of status,
We went deep.
the difference between dominance and prestige, the push and pull between wanting to fit in and stand out,
Yeah.
and even how our ancient brains are trying to make sense of this crazy modern world that we live in.
It's a lot for little brains to handle.
It really is. Hopefully, by understanding these fundamental drives, we can start to navigate our lives and our relationships
Absolutely.
with more insight, more compassion.
More self-awareness.
Yes, and maybe even a little bit of a sense of humor.
Oh, definitely. Gotta have humor.
Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to figure it out
We're all just works in progress.
with ancient hardware and our very 21st century problems. Next time you catch yourself endlessly scrolling on social media or feel that pang of social comparison,
We've all been there.
remember what we've learned from Dr. Henderson. It's about understanding the game,
Hey.
making conscious choices, and staying connected to what truly matters to you.
Love that.
Until next time, keep exploring, learning, and as always, diving deep.
See you next time.